Good evening, Dr. Micah Fisher. Just wanted to say hello again, update you a bit. It's been a few weeks since I did a video, and just watched a particular speaker today for the first time, introduced to the work of Bayo Akomolafe. I'll spell that, of course, for you down in the link below, and you can look at some of his work and writing. How to describe what Bayo does and how he speaks, how he writes. That really is the exploration that I encourage you to check out. It's very rare that I find somebody I'm so attracted to and go, okay, well, that just has a great appeal on many levels, from my critical analytical mind to my artistic and aesthetic heart, and just my, gut instincts and my base chakra of, oh, this is so true and so useful knowledge and sharing going on from Bayo and his work and his traditions. So I will try to arc out a little bit to give you an intro to what I understand are his traditions and why they work so well. And that really starts with just at least the newest book he's working on and the title of it. So let's start there. Oh, just a little tune in. I'm doing dishes still. I not finished dishes. I thought I'd do a video in between drying and washing. This here is the leftovers of being attacked by a porcupine in the woods the other day. No, not a real live, full-grown porcupine. It was a caterpillar about yay long with all their spiny, furry threads that stick out of their body as protection. And he was climbing up my back, or she, and got to a point where I was sitting on the rock so relaxed, and I felt something, and I thought, well, maybe it's just an ant or something, and I squished it down. And not a good idea when I didn't know it was a caterpillar, and I saw later, oh my God, and then I was rubbing it and scratching it. It was so itchy. And then I realized, well, that's what these caterpillars' defense is. Their intelligence working is to spring all these tiny little fragments of those hairy pointed things, and even some of them have little bits of toxin on them, and they go into your skin and just cause amazing irritation. So that's why birds and other shrews and mice do not eat typically these caterpillars with the furry adaptation. So little lesson learned, stinging a little bit. And so you're really getting me in the middle of my domestic life. Let's leave that alone and move on to Bayo Akomolafe. Obviously, he's a PhD. He's well educated Nigerian, American, American living, as far as I can tell, but Nigerian background, and studies and has studied deeply the or Yoruba tradition, some call it religion, of course, and it's a very ancient religion, pre-Christian. Obviously, has very strong animistic, or the nature of understanding of creatures greater than the human being and non-human being, of spirits. So animism is a kind of ideological or type of practice of a religious practice. Very primal, very ancient, and very, one could say, in tune with a lot of wisdom. And a lot of people are bringing back the animism as a type of paradigm, as a new worldview, to encourage the one that we have gone through, to shift and change and transform from its non-anti-animistic traditions. And that comes from modernist theory I'm talking about, in the challenge of modernism and science that is attempted in many ways to erase religion and the religious traditions, and animism being one of those traditions of understanding and inquiry. Inquiry being, how do we humans, with our ancestors of all kinds that are species that have come before us, and or the elements even that do not come from just animals and plants and fungi and viruses, but actually go right back to the elements of stone, rock, minerals, crystals, and particles in the entire universe, as part of the animation of the universe that makes it all intelligent in its own ways. And how can we align with that? That's part of animist practice. Not something I do consistently or systematically, but as an artist, I'm also very materially sensitive. So I use a kind of animistic approach, indeed, a methodology of aesthetic attunement, and find subtle awareness in everything I do as an artist, visually, textually, and in the other ways as a performance artist and so on. So that is not what I'm talking about, but let's go back to Bayo. Comes from this Yoruba tradition, which my reading of it, particular book that I was passed on to by an African American friend of mine and colleague, and the book was by someone called Ali is their last name, and I've forgotten their first name, but don't remember the title of the book, but it was on the Yoruba tradition and that critique of the dominant Western tradition and modernism in the worldview. That in Yoruba tradition, it was very clear to me that it was not a deficit-based reality. So it didn't start in sin, or it didn't start in that kind of fear-based structuring and a paranoia in a way in relationship to the world, to nature, and so on, and therefore no need to conquer nature. And Bayo speaks in one of his lectures, he doesn't even like to use the word nature from his perspective as an animist, because nature tends to be already separated from the human, and therefore the human is always trying to other nature and using those categories to basically dominate and oppress and colonize. Interesting view, right? To even be conscious of when we use the word nature, how it can be constructed within an oppressive politics and of power, domination, and paranoia at its base. That's my whole teaching, as you know, that's my fear work that I do. So another thing that Bayo Akomolafe has integrated with his spiritual tradition from Yoruba, but also a study of many mystics, I can tell, in his teaching. I also hear his artist and poet, very strong capability with wide and deep language, for all the way from very academic, scholarly language of the postmodern, post-structuralist world, some of the modernists, but he's definitely someone who says, we have to transform this modernism in ways that are not postmodern, is what he calls, but he's really calling for something we don't quite know what it is. And then he says, well, people ask him, well, where are we going to go? Where do we get, the capabilities and the intelligences to get out of this box of modernism? And he says, well, don't try and get out of the box. First of all, that's modernism itself, always putting things in boxes. And so you're just reproducing more modernism in your thought system, and you're not really going to transform that much. You'll tweak things. I love that critique, and makes a lot of sense to me in my work too, is when we try to use fear-based management techniques to try and overcome the problems of a fear-based reality, or motivational strategies and patterns that are part of our philosophy and become part of our value systems, part of our religions, part of our science, part of our knowledge making, meaning making, etc. So Bayo really challenges that, and tries to get us to understand there's a way of understanding wisdom. And so he then introduces a concept called pedagogy of cracks. And I haven't had a chance to listen to his full discourse on that, and he's writing a book on it, so it's not out yet. He has several books, which I highly recommend. So all of that was very appealing to me, pedagogy of cracks, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that interesting me in some of the art explorations I do in artist inquiry, and also in my own understanding of where the best and the sort of highest level of what I would say is this creativity for transformation and the living of a life in transformation. Always part of that is restoration, of course, but part of that is also transformation and a transvaluation. So looking for principles and policies and guidance in creating not what he calls universals, but transversals. They are in transit, and they are in between and intersecting with knowledge is from all kinds of sources. Again, you can hear this guy has got a science, he's got religion, he's got ethics, he's got art and poetics and the mystical and the very mundane. And he's very much about how we live our lives, that's a big part of our spirituality. And I don't think in the whole hour lecture he used the word spirituality at all. I love that. And that tells me someone doesn't need to go around, arcing out and virtue signaling, oh, I'm spiritual and you should be spiritual too. And that makes us superior. So he avoids, he's very humble, and you'll hear this constantly, and it comes out of, again, the foundations of his Yoruba African root traditions that are pre-Christian and pre-Western in the ways we understand, but highly influenced by the East, of course, as Africa was. And Africa also influences the East and the West. So the pedagogy of cracks, to just give a little bit about the sense of how he was speaking to it, was that wisdom is not something of when one accumulates all kind of wise knowledge and then has wisdom, and not just even experience accumulated is wisdom. So he says, I'm not a wise person. He is interested in wisdom for sure as part of this, what comes after modernism in a way, and where can humans live and other creatures on this planet live in some kind of way that is multi-species centered, multi-sensory centered, and not just this heavy bias towards one kind of operation of our brains, our neurons, our cognitive capacities, but much more something that operates in the cracks. And this would be the atypical, right? Neuroatypy, which is becoming more and more interested. People interested in theories of autism, but autism way beyond a pathology and disease, but actually being a functional kind of operation within the cracks, we would call it. He calls it, because it's not operating in the norms of the walls that we build to defend our reality and box it off from the world. So we need cracks in that world, in that we build conceptually, we build through value systems, and then we put it into institution systems. And he doesn't say it as I would, but I would add this, he's definitely talking about the path of fearlessness. He's talking about a holistic, integral knowledge and knowing and way of being. So those are why I attracted immediately, and great to just hear how he spins all those things together, and very eloquent and very aware, sensitive individual to the relationality of the world and his own relationality with his speakers, those who he speaks to. You can hear it, feel it, and people are very, very affected by him. So again, I can describe it, but you really have to sit yourself in front of the screen or wherever else you can and watch and listen to Bayo in his work. Pedagogy of the cracks would be a teaching where he's really saying that wisdom comes when everything is cracked or disrupted, when everything but a major part or some part significantly that we can travel in and move in between. So there's many different ideas in post-structuralist theory about the liminal, the transitional, the ecotone, and ecological studies as well, been exploring these zones of high productivity, of diversity, convergence, divergence, and multiple pathways and perspectives on reality and various formations, and a lot of accident. In a sense, accident, maybe by design, that we don't even understand. And so he's got this humbleness about the not knowing, of course, but also that we can know a tremendous amount in a certain kind of way, as long as we carry this wisdom, not that we have it particularly held like something we own and copyright, but the wisdom, he says, we carry in that we came from the mistakes and failures and the cracks in the stable part of the world of evolution itself, of structures of culture where stabilities were built, but then they always break down, dissolve, crack, have mutations and accidents, that stir new possibilities and formations. So without sounding horribly abstract as I am, I understand the other way would be is the pedagogy of messiness, pedagogy of the cracks. And he goes further than just the messiness, which a lot of post-structuralists will talk about. And he's really talking about how that is an important site for when wisdom shows up enough to cause cracks in our ways of stability. And not just our ways. He says other species also require this wisdom that shows up. And it's, again, that's like the collective, that we can't just say intelligence and that's wisdom. It's not even in those proper categories. Our language is so limited, he would say, in capturing what wisdom is, and it's disruptive. And so he's very much into the subversion, the disruption, and this pedagogy of non-safety, where we are in states of destabilization in the cracks. And he's saying that today that's what we have to learn for our real resiliency. And he's not even saying to solve our problems. He's not even sure they can be solved. He's really, in some sense, saying they have to be just traveled, and we have to attach and get to know them in different new ways, with always not trying to just solve them and get rid of the problems, right? And move on to the next one and check it off on our list, and then get our exchange economy of values and powers and authority and status because we solved those problems, and great followings of people, or whatever it is that leaders may want to do. That is not always a good idea. Not a good idea because they often keep the people stupid and control people that way and herd them into conformity. So those are just a few arkings of this pedagogy of the cracks. And then I'll end this short video intro to Bayo, that he really gives a lot of attention to the wisdom space and possibilities of having and being around children, including his own. He has 2 children. And the one is a child diagnosed with autism. And he will talk about deeply. He's written a book, apparently. I saw the title just recently flashing on his 3-year-old, and what he had learned in being with and learning from, and trying to teach that 3-year-old to negotiate this world of a certain kind of neuro, dominance, that the neuroatypia of someone with autism, for example. And we know Greta Thunberg, the great green activist, climate change guru for a while, and maybe still is. As a very young person, she just had this amazing ability to find a way through the cracks to become one of the world's most famous activists within a few years. Phenomenal for someone who is like 14, 15, 16 years old. Never been seen before, someone of that capacity in that age. But his talking about the 3-year-old having that same capability and capacity, and they're add their autism to it, but also just the age, as he says, because he's also another daughter, a couple of years older, and what he's learning constantly from them. Just wanted to put that in because the educator in both Bayo's work and the educator in me, as you probably follow some of my work, I'm always attempting to think about that, the child's perspective. It's kind of a simple language. It's much more than a child's perspective. Again, the language being very clumsy and awkward to get the nuance of what I'm speaking about. When I start to think as a philosopher, I start to think of the human being, I start to think as a being in ways that the child, I often use the idea of a 10-year-old just as a kind of formulation for a hypothesis of a crack that the child always represents to an adult, a crack in the adult's wall, the adult's stability, and the adult's vision for the future. And that child, let's just say the 10-year-old, but it could be the 3-year-old, it could be someone with atypy, it could be someone with not, just what we might call regular brain functioning, emotional functioning. That everything in that relationship, child to adult. And that's what I really liked about Bayo. I could hear he was very sensitive to that. And that's great appeal to me on many levels, as I say, not just psychological, not just developmental, but aesthetically and philosophically and spiritually, etc., etc. There's a corrective, and even that word is too harsh. It's a coesis, perhaps, as Ed Edger would call it, a copoesis of creative metamorphosis. It's using another Edger term. So she practices matricial theory, which I also integrated into my work, as well as fearlessness theory, as well as these indigenous-based theories, in the magical, the mythical, and the trickster. Yay! So ending on the Bayo, his claim, he says, I'm a trickster. And he has a lot of stories that he utilizes, that he's studied the stories of, sounds like several traditions, but he certainly knows the Yoruba tradition, and for many countries, certainly in Africa and so on. And he loves to use those stories in very teaching good ways, as you know, the Socratic method and many other great teachers of all kinds. But you know, pre-Western, pre-Greek, Greco-Roman teaching stories was the foundation of pedagogy. And so in the future, I will probably write and start to articulate more. And if you want to ask more questions about how I understand his work, and then checking it out yourself, I think it'll just start to create some really interesting stir that we need to come to understand how to operate in this pedagogy of cracks. So all those things, good things about Bayo Akomolafe, I'll leave it over to you now, and just thanks and gratitude to the work that Bayo has done, and how he's brought together so many really interesting things that are well worth, I think, the attention of any human being who's thinking about, you know, past, present, and future, and where we can go without, you know, trying to solve the problem with the same problematic thinking that gets in the way and caused the problems in the first place. Quote there to Albert Einstein and his bringing that, you know, knowledge to us, that we have to pay attention to the ways we do things, not just the answers and the technologies, but the ways that we relate and live to them and with them. Okay, thanks very much for tonight. I better get back to dishes.